I first went to Cuba in the late 1970s. I maintained an interest in it in 1998. Without any warning or expectation, I became the United Kingdom Trade Minister, and I set myself a personal challenge to use that position to normalise commercial trade relations between the United Kingdom and Cuba. That turned out to be a little bit more challenging than it sounded, but I persisted with it, and I went in the course of the next few years to Cuba repeatedly. I held 5 positions in government, and every job I was in government I went to Cuba, and every time I went to Cuba, the last minister who was there from the British government was me, and in different roles. And I built up very good relations and many very warm friendships with the Cuban leadership. And hopefully through that time that we extended the hand of friendship and sent messages that at least not everyone in the UK government and establishment was in any way hostile to Cuba. And inevitably everything I did and everything I saw and heard there reinforced my basic view that the campaign waged against Cuba by the United States of America was one of the cruelest and most vindictive vendettas in 20th century history, continuing into the 21st century, and it was also utterly counterproductive in terms of its supposed political objectives. Relations between the UK and Cuba ebbed and flowed during that period. I think there was a kind of little high spot in the late 90s, early 2000 when not only was I going at ministerial level, but also we had an excellent ambassador in Cuba, David Ridgway, who made enormous headway in establishing good relations with Fidel Castro and with the Cuban leadership. And then it entered a darker period when we had a terrible ambassador, and also it was the period of Aznar dictating EU foreign policy and the common position on Cuba. But anyway, through all of that, relationships were maintained. Some progress was made. When I started doing that, I just say this isn't by way of perspective. When I went first at the issue, which was actually an excuse for there being no significant commercial relations between the UK and Cuba, was an ancient piece of debt from the 1980s for 20-odd million pounds buttons, but that had become the reason for withdrawing ECGD cover for Cuba, export credit guarantee cover for Cuba, and so that had persisted for 15 years. That really nothing could happen commercially without that cover. But just by way of perspective and to reinforce some of what has been said, is that nominally ECGD cover, or it's now British Export Finance, I think, cover is back, but it's still extremely difficult for anyone to use it in terms of Cuba. So whatever progress is made, ostensibly, there are always hidden hands which are trying to pull back on that progress and to make sure that in fact nothing very much changes. We have a very, very good ambassador and embassy in Havana at the present time. There are plenty of people now who want to do business in Cuba, but it is still very difficult, as I'll go on to explain from our own more recent experience. I came out of politics in 2005, and I thought that my relationship, apart from personal interest with Cuba, was probably over. But I was asked in 2007, I think, to chair a seminar in Havana on renewable energy. And the Cubans realized that they had become dangerously over-dependent on oil from Venezuela, and that there was a ever-present danger of finding themselves in the same situation as they had done when the Soviet Union withdrew overnight and Cuba had no oil, and it was the start of a very, very difficult period for the Cuban people. they realise, and they still realise, that it's one of their highest priorities to diversify their energy supply, and that they needed to look at options, and particularly in renewable energy. And the upshot of that seminar, and they saw the UK as a potential partner in that, the upshot of that was that instead of trying to get someone else to do it, I became chairman of a company which called Havana Energy, which eventually formed a joint venture with the sugar minister, Azúcar, in Cuba, to develop biomass plants at 5 of the sugar mills. And of course the potential exists for the same thing to happen at all the sugar mills, and to make a very significant impact on Cuba's energy needs. I won't go in, we might talk a wee bit more about that, these projects later, but the point again and again, just to reinforce what has been said, let nobody tell you that the blockade is over, because for the past 5-6 years we have been working on this, and everywhere you turn there are obstructions to it. And the British government has been complicit in that, and continues to be complicit in that. Not necessarily proactively, but reactively, in refusing to do anything that cuts across American foreign policy and American objectives. So, for example, we're a tiny company. We needed a partner to do this in terms of for the equipment and for the capital for the first of these sugar mills. Eventually, of course, no British bank will go near it because they're in fear of American sanctions, and quite illegally refuse to provide banking facilities for any company which is dealing with Cuba. No British company or international company which either has or perceives itself to have the potential for contacts with the United States will touch it. And eventually we did manage to involve the French state company Alstom, who were going to be our partners in this. And that was proceeding very well, and it was going to be, the equipment was going to be manufactured in Poland. We had export credit guarantees from the Polish government, everything hunky-dory, and then completely from left field, Alstom get taken over by General Electric, and the shutter came down like that, and now we continue to work on other options, as some of our friends here know. But that is how long a haul it is. But within the past year, one of my colleagues in Havana Energy, who had been a client of the Bank of Scotland for 35 years, had his account closed arbitrarily with minimal notice, because Lloyd's Bank policy is to not to accept as clients anyone who has any dealings with Cuba. The idea that the blockade is over is a total and utter fiction. Let me assure you, the blockade is alive, and indeed there is a paradox here, or perhaps it's a logical, if you have a logical paradox, because the closer the perception in America is that the blockade is going to be lifted, then the greater the vested interest of American business is that nothing should happen, in case by the time they get there that others will have entered the field and closed down the options for them. So you have the paradox of the impression being that all this is changing, but actually there is a logic in the fact that in fact the blockade in many ways is just as tight as it ever was. There is a huge amount of need for investment in Cuba. There are huge commercial opportunities in Cuba for those who see it from that perspective, because the consequence, the inevitable consequence of this wicked 60-year war of attrition against the Cuban people has been to reduce so much of the fabric of Cuba to a very low level of activity. It is inevitable. It would happen anywhere. If we had a 60-year blockade against us in this country, then our agriculture would be in the same condition, our industry would be in the same condition, our housing would be in the same condition. All of that is the consequence of the United States vendetta against the Cuban people, which is continuing down to the present day. So the opportunities are there, the needs are there, but I am absolutely certain that must and will be on the terms of the Cubans and not on the terms of the United States. And I think there is this mentality that Cuba is waiting for the United States to arrive and somehow rescue it from this terrible plight. Nothing could be further from the truth. Nothing could be further from the truth. And so, if there are relationships of mutual respect, then of course it is an enormous relief and an enormous potential for Cuba that there will be a normalization of relationships. But the Cuban infrastructure today could not withstand that influx, even if it wanted that influx of American investment, which they are now queuing up to put into Cuba, but presumably not understanding that it is going to be in Cuban terms rather than on their terms. This has to proceed at the pace that Cuba can take it. It must proceed at the pace where it brings benefit to the Cuban people, and of course it will proceed at the pace which preempts the kind of exploitative relationship that existed between the United States and Cuba prior to 1959. So much as possible, there is a window of opportunity. I deeply hope, for the sake of the Cuban people, that window of opportunity does not close before further progress can be made. But the crucial point is we're certainly not there yet, and the other crucial point is that it must and will happen on terms that benefit the Cuban people and not the United States of America. Thank you.